elected MP being a speaker to a position that the speaker shall not be an elected person. So we are saying we are done with having an elected person as a member, we're saying that no longer shall an elected MP be able to sit as Speaker of the House. Now what's interesting is that the language used in the legislation is that when the House of Assembly first meets after any dissolution of Parliament, and before it proceeds to the dispatch of any other business, it shall elect a person who is not a member of the House of Assembly or Senate to be the Speaker. I think that that limits the options which the government is creating in seeking to create this independent post, because it may be that you want an MP in the future to be your Speaker. So, like other jurisdictions, you can provide that there is an option for the Speaker to be a member of Parliament, and or alternatively, that the Speaker be someone outside of the elected assembly. You may be restricting the operation of the government in the future by saying that the person who is to be Speaker shall not be an MP. The other issue, sir, is that the Speaker, who is not an MP, has a casting vote. Now, we understand, and I heard the leader of government business speak to the issues of Trinidad not being able to govern, and there were times in Barbados where there was a close number and you had to coordinate. I think we're currently far from that position, sir. But these things have a habit. Today for you, tomorrow for me, all that stuff goes up, goes down eventually. And we now have a situation where this Speaker, who is not going to be a member of Parliament, is going to have a casting vote. So we are creating a position which I understand the principle, but the purpose of independence, we need to weigh with regard to the power of that independent person having a casting vote, and I'm sure I'll hear the more constitutionally minded speakers in this place speak about whether or not even persons like us, who are not elected, should be able to say certain things about certain things. So those 2 points, sir, I would suggest that the government consider in terms of the wording of the legislation. In terms of precedents, yes, it has occurred in other jurisdictions, and we are playing a game of catch-up. But let's look a little closely at those jurisdictions. In Dominica, the Constitution allows the Speaker to be elected either from within the House or from outside. So they give the option, either pick someone who is an MP or you go outside. The historical records show that Speaker Boyd Knight served as Speaker from April 17, 2000 to February 10th, 2020. I believe there was some public discourse about that appointment towards the end, but Dominica is one of the Caribbean territories that actually exercised the power to elect someone from outside of the members of Parliament to be Speaker. I believe that provides an active case study if anyone wants to look at perhaps how things can go. In St. Kitts, it provides for the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker that when the National Assembly first meets after any general election, and before it proceeds to the dispatch of any other business, it shall elect a person to be the Speaker of Assembly, and that person may be elected from among the members of the National Assembly or from persons who are not members of the Assembly but who are qualified. Again, you give persons the options. What we're doing is restricting it and saying we cannot have a member of Parliament as Speaker. In Trinidad, the Constitution under Section 50 allows the Speaker to be again elected from outside of Parliament, but in practice, say for the example received from the leader of government business, most speakers have been current or former MPs. A fun fact would be to look at the current speaker in Trinidad as it currently is constituted. So, sir, we also see examples that when speakers now come from outside of the Member of Parliament pool as such, they don't have a casting vote. That, I believe, even out the concerns of persons who are saying you have a non-elected person having this level of power. I believe, sir, that we also have an example in Guyana under Article 56 that the Speaker of National Assembly may be elected. So you see all this language, sir, that you have the option. What we're doing is restricting ourselves to having someone outside of the members of Parliament, and this person has a casting vote. The precedents I have seen is that, yes, the Caribbean jurisdictions provide for either within or without, but they also limit the ability of someone without to have such a powerful casting vote. The concept is whether, is it a bridge too far, or can we do a simple amendment to have it capture both positions? Now, in the UK, I don't know, do we say we like to follow or we don't follow or rely on the precedent? The understanding is that you have a speaker who is independent, and the other parties, the major ones, don't run against the speaker. That's the understanding. We are trying to establish our own conventions as a new republic. I think we had a recent example of how we really need to have these conventions established for prosperity as such. And in the case of a speaker, we need to be mindful of what we are seeking to do while capturing the best of what other countries have done. So, simple question. Has the government considered the issue of the casting vote by a non-member, and what's the position on that? 2, has the government considered whether or not to allow flexibility for future governments, and indeed for itself, that you want to adjust the wording which says it shall be from outside of the MPs to give the option that it could be within or without in terms of the person who is selected as speaker. The principle, sir, I have no issue with. I believe that it certainly makes good sense. I believe it is something which encourages the independence of the office, but I believe that the 2 issues I've raised in relation to where the speaker is being drawn from and the casting vote is something which the government can give further thought to if they deem necessary. Sir, the proposal which relates to the attendance of ministers to debates in both houses, I think is an excellent initiative, and I believe it will strengthen the democratic process. To have, let's call it question time, or the ability of ministers, the AG, to respond to statements in the House, I think is an excellent idea and will allow for the development of all members of either place. It would also give the opportunity for an astute AG, Prime Minister, or Minister to showcase their experience and skill in dealing with any queries that come before them. Hopefully, it's actually done in that manner, and that the standing orders are not utilized as a shield, as we see currently being done in other jurisdictions, where every question which is being asked is being blocked on the basis of national security or something of the other, sir. So I think that's an excellent initiative. Finally, in relation to the change of the constituency threshold, moving it from 115/85, which is a pretty decent blood pressure reading, to 120/80, I understand that this is necessary so that the EBC does not have to adjust the number of constituencies. I heard the contribution of Senator Maladou, and we do have a lot of constituencies, and we do have a lot of representatives, and there was a time, I believe, when this government was against big government. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. You know, history and memories and things, I can't recall, sir, but we do have a pretty large government. Whether reducing the seats will actually reduce government, I don't necessarily think so, because you can still appoint someone from somewhere else to sit as a minister, sir. But I believe the intention is one which allows the EBC to get on with their business. And speaking frankly, if there are any concerns about, let's call it gerrymandering, I don't think that's a immediate pressing concern in terms of how things sit. So all in all, sir, I support the legislation. I believe the two questions I have raised are relevant for the purposes of this discourse, and I look forward to hearing the government response and rationale, as well as if consideration should be given to moving away from such a strict shall in terms of where persons are to be drawn from for the role of speaker. Before I close, the philosophy which you hear today is based on a philosopher who recently passed, a good friend of mine, Miguel Kisto, and he always said that it's not hard, but you have to try to be fair. And in trying to be fair in my contribution today, I believe that I have captured the ethos, and I urge the government to consider the representations made from that aspect. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. Senator Gregory Nichols.
Mr. President, I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the debate before this chamber. The bill under consideration requires us to pass an amendment to the Constitution. And it's not unexpected that we would have a lot of concerns in the public domain. But, sorry.
Senator Nichols, let's have Senator Thompson take the chair for a few minutes before you get into full stride.
Senator Nichols, please.
I'm obliged, Madam Deputy President. These changes, in my view, are prudent, necessary, and reasonable. They are to enable the election of a Speaker of the House of Assembly, to allow for ministers to address both houses, and to make the necessary changes to allow for the Electoral and Boundaries Commission to fix boundaries in a way that allows Barbadians certainty and consistency without having to make boundary changes each and every time there is a population shift, causing what I would call a really idiosyncratic approach to the determination of constitutional boundaries. So the independence of the Speaker, which I would purport to deal, Madam Deputy President, which I purport to deal with first, is an important feature of our democracy. No one has ever argued that the speakers that we have had, from Sir Theodore Branca to Burton Hines, Lizzie Bowden, Lawson Weeks, Ishmael Roy, Michael Carrington, and even the current speaker, Mr. Arthur Holder, have been less than impartial or independent in the discharge of their business. And I know, Madam President, you were looking at me, and I saw many times when you were, as a minister, had your own personal clashes with the speaker. But in the fairness of the political debate, you were at the apex of the cutting thrust of the political titans. And therefore, having to be held in check, as you may purport to do with me now, is not something that one could reasonably say was unfair. But at the same time, Madam President, we know that in our system, we have copied many things from the British. And as I said in our earlier debate on the report on the Parliamentary Reform Commission, we have copied everything, but we have written it down, and in the process of writing it down, we have created problems that don't exist in the United Kingdom. There is no provision in our constitution right now for the election of a speaker or the choosing of a speaker. The speaker is chosen by reverting to the standing orders of the House of Assembly, which carry with them the traditions or some of the traditions in the British system. But what is missing creates the problem. Because in the United Kingdom, the Speaker of the House of Commons does not face election challenges by the major political parties. Once that person is elected Speaker by the members of the Commons, the major political parties do not stand candidates in that seat. That person is returned after election, no matter which government wins the election. We don't have that in our system. Our parliament is much smaller. Some senators will want to make it even much smaller. But in a parliament of over 650 members, you can afford to have a seat cleared out by the major political parties where no one contests. But not in a small country like Barbados. That is not practical. And one of the things that we have not spoken about is that the fact that that person who is elected by the members or the people in the constituency has no voice in any single debate for the ensuing 5 years or how long ever the parliamentary term lasts. And that is unfair to that segment of the population. So while we have copied part of the English system, we even drive the speaker. The two leaders of the political parties, Prime Minister and opposition, drive the speaker in our system to the chair. And a lot of people don't understand why that is done, but that was done because the speaker back in the old days in England was the one person who had to take the bad news of what the Commons had decided to the king. The king may not like that decision, and many of the speakers were beheaded as a result of taking the decisions of the Commons to the king. But we are still in 2022. Last time we convened a new session of Parliament, dragging our speaker to the chair, like if the president of our republic would ever have such a sentence to pronounce. So that part of our process of parliamentary reform requires us to update our constitution in ways that do not require wholesale reform of the constitution. And what I want to do in this debate is to quell this continuing notion that the only way you can alter the constitution is by wholesale reform. And that wholesale reform of the Constitution is the only thing intended by Section 49 of the Constitution. They are not mutable or fungible. You can have constitutional alteration, and that is the proper terminology for it, because that comprises a number of methods by which the Constitution can be changed. Amendment is only one of them. And you can have wholesale reform. The government... Sorry.
Please proceed, Senator Nichols.
The government has elected or chosen in this instance to make an amendment to the Constitution to make provision for three things. And I understand that there is a process that has gone through, the country has gone through in relation to constitutional reform. And I myself was a part of that process and serving in the capacity as the deputy chairman of that commission. The government has received the report since last year, late last year, around this time, September last year. And we presented our findings to the public in January of this year. And the public debate lasted about 2 weeks. And I want to say to my good friend, Senator Boyce, that while it was the intention of the commission to go through each and every one of the chapters of the current constitution with the public, when we started our public town hall meetings, although we gave thematic guidelines to how we would want to do this, the discussions largely surrounded that of fundamental rights, and only one of them, not life, not property, but the question of discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. That's one of the largest things that we had to face almost every meeting. There were discussions about the political system and some discussions about citizenship, largely when we visited the diaspora across North America and in the UK. But outside of that, there has not been a consistent calling for each of the other chapters to be discussed with the same fervency and zeal in which the public had attended to those issues. That is not to say that they're not important. But I understand that the government has asked for other things to be done. Certainly, coming on to the end of the tenure of the Commission, Mr. President, the Trinidad Constitutional Reform Commission report was published. And we saw that it contained a detailed set of provisions as it relates to the civic responsibilities of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We thought, or some of us thought, that we should engage ourselves in that discussion. But to do it after we had closed the public consultations would have meant that we would have delayed our submission of the report, which we intended to do in September last year. But at the same time, it is the position of the government that while you are bringing a new constitution to the people, you can't only set out what are the rights of the citizens and what are the obligations of the state as it relates to those citizens without attending to the issues as to the civic responsibilities of every citizen of the country being a citizen of the Republic of Barbados. And that is a noble position, and I understand that the government has hired a consultant to deal with that issue. It is part of the new cut and thrust of constitutional reform across the globe, and if you look at any indice that is looking and marking constitutional progress and constitutional reform across the world, you see that that is a new element of the structure of governance and citizenship responsibilities comes in very large there. And that is something that we have not dealt with in the report, and it is being dealt with now. Mr. President, I keep hearing this notion that the government has failed to bring a Republican constitution. And I somehow think that it is time that we need to return to the teaching of civics and social studies as mandatory exam topics in this country. And you're going to hear that from people who do not understand these things. A republic is something that we have always had, in my respectful submission. And if you talk about systems of governance, anybody who wants to tell you in practical terms that we were a monarchy for 1966 must be able to explain what then is independence. Because certainly the British monarch had no residual powers to rescind any acts passed by the Sovereign Parliament of Barbados. But what we had was a massive contradiction where everything was done in the name of the British monarch while we were saying that we were independent. So that no political theorists worth their salt, except those who practice between 12 and 1 o'clock every day on the public radio stations, will ever consider that Barbados was anything other than an independent Republican state. But we couldn't take we could not claim for ourselves that we were a republic because we decided to retain the British monarch as our head of state. All we did when we took oaths, whether it was the Prime Minister, ministers of government, members of parliament, senators, we swore an oath of allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen in an independent country. And that contradiction, as I said before, was the retention of that part of the metaphysical empire that we could not get out of our heads. And her heirs and her successors to bear true and faithful allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen. Like we're three on the Game of Thrones or something like that. So that the notion that we only became a republic in 2021 does not tell the full story. And I always remember when in this chamber, many years ago, when I believe it would be our third native Governor General sat in those chairs behind us on the occasion of the 350th anniversary of the Parliament of Barbados, to make the point that even if political theorists and lawyers and scholars would disagree that what we have is really the Westminster system, it is our system and is our own, and we like it. We know how to operate it. And that is the truth. But what that system requires is sometimes piecemeal changes, Mr. President. Sometimes where routine changes are made to upgrade the status of your democracy. That is not the same thing as constitutional reform, which is a much broader concept of restructuring and deconstructing the Constitution. You might build back the Constitution on the same scaffolding and foundation as presently exists, because experience would teach you that there are certain things that work well and you do not need to change them, even though there are bright, shiny objects out there in the world as examples. We might want to try that, but experience tells you, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. So we might want to have an executive president. We might want to have elected Senate. We might want to have, a system that they have in the United States or the state of California, or something that is out there bright and shiny. But our collective experiences, we have a mix of what the British have. But what we want to do when we're dealing with constitutional reform is to interrogate whether or not it fits the purpose of the democracy that we are building. And that is the fundamental question. That is not the same, Mr. President, as making amendments to the Constitution that are required at this specific time. So we have this debate now going on in the country that the only way that you can touch the Constitution is if there's wholesale reform. I don't understand where that comes from, but people watching too much CNN, because the American Constitution, where that theory comes from, was largely constructed in a way where to safeguard the interests of the smaller states against the big states, that you made it difficult for constitutional change to be. So the Electoral College that they talk about that's unfair, that's undemocratic, the United States system can't be changed because the Constitution of the United States was not made in a way to allow for change. So they do it by amendment, and in order to get an amendment, each state must vote on it in the legislature, House and Senate, all 50 states, and then in the Congress, you have to get a 2/3 majority of legislators, of the Senates, in the state legislatures, and also in the federal government. But they did that because they had to construct a state at the time that was fit for them. But we're now trying to adopt, because I said we're watching too much CNN, or NBC or Fox. And we hear these things that you should not change the Constitution. But Section 49 allows us to do that. And it speaks to modifying, it speaks to even obliterating some of the very provisions. But it puts a process. So when you hear, Mr. President, that we agree in principle with it, but we have an objective, because you can only change the Constitution if you bring fundamental reform. You do fundamental reform, they call it in constitutional theory a constitutional health check. Suggested every 10 or 15 years, even 20 years. It's almost like you're passing the baton from one generation to the next to ensure that the systems of governance, the way in which we uphold fundamental rights, the way in which we look at the rule of law, the separation of powers, the protection of rights, again, I say that, are important. These things you look at holistically within the context of the society as it has emerged, as values change. Our approach to certain fundamental rights has changed over years. Only a couple months ago, this parliament changed the law as it related to how we treat certain colonial crimes like wandering, where we lock up young people, particularly girls, in situations and put them into reformatory schools for the basic things that you can't even describe what wandering is. Apart from a policeman or some social worker saying, this child was wandering and therefore they have to be institutionalized. Our courts had to strike that down because our views on these colonial laws have evolved over time. So that to say that we could not change the law in conformity with the ruling of the courts, it meant that we had to come back to deal with the legislation, because that legislation was struck down by our highest court. Our high court struck down the legislation that we passed on bail. We had to come back by way of constitutional amendment to deal with that, to make provision for bail. So that the notion that we can only touch the Constitution by way of alteration, by way of full-scale reform, is a political gimmick peddled by those who do not even understand the word constitutional law. Mr. President, we also have heard that constitutional reform and parliamentary reform have been going on, and the commissions have reported. I want to suggest, Mr. President, that in this cycle of our parliament, that Barbadians really engage in those discussions. As part of the Constitutional Reform Commission, there were a lot of recommendations made by the public, and I'm certain that the Parliamentary Reform Commission had it to change. We saw it fit not to make fundamental changes to the political structure of the state in circumstances where there were only a half dozen to a dozen people making those loud recommendations for changes. And they were fundamental, but the society has to engage in them. And I want to call again on those in the civic society to pick up the two reports and to begin discussions, begin debates among the schools. The service clubs and organizations can arrange for the schools to have debating essay competitions and that kind of stuff, because young people too must participate even more and more in this exercise. Because even though the reforms that are contemplated or that are discussed might not pass muster in this place or in the next place, they are on the radar. And your experience 10, 15, 20 years from now, when these discussions emerge again, will have the benefit of the context of the history of the last 20 or 30 years to determine whether or not those recommendations that did not make it are still relevant or are still normative. That is why this discussion is important. So that the constitutional health check, which the opposition seems to be suggesting is the only way to alter the Constitution, is something that is ongoing. And one of the things that we recommended in the Constitutional Reform Commission report was to put in a provision that made it mandatory for the process of constitutional reform to occur at a set period every 10 or 20 years, depending on how the government saw it. But it is not the same thing as the process of constitutional alteration. Now, it is amazing, Mr. President, that when we sat as the CRC and the then current leader of the opposition came and made his presentation, it was different. Obviously, there was a different leader of the Democratic Labour Party at the time when they first came. But they made a submission of a post-reconstruction or transformation constitution, similar to what has happened in South Africa after the apartheid era came to an end. Not a word about that in the general public, but they made a lengthy contribution to the commission in that regard. We asked them to submit it in writing. Didn't come in writing. But you hear some echoes about this constitution. We need a new Republican constitution. I dropped down some notes that I heard made by the leader of opposition business in this place. And I want to know whether or not he is indeed serious. Because he spoke about the election of the speaker, like how they elect judges in other places. And I want him to tell Senator Walters can speak after him, if it is the position of the Democratic Labour Party that in their mind a Republican constitution will mean that we electing judges. Because the last statement we heard from the Democratic Labour Party on judges, that the ones in the CCJ were politicians dressed in robes. So I want to know if in this Republican constitution that they contemplate, that they're calling for the election of the speaker, that he's some alderman in the city council in Albany, New York, or the fire chief, that we elect judges as part of their understanding of how the democracy under the Democratic Labour Party constitution will work. Because that is a serious statement that you have to watch. Because when you look and evaluate all of what is going on about fundamental rights and constitutional change, the theocratization of the debate, you have to watch those things. And the people like me, when you hear them, my antenna go and don't come back down. Because I'm connecting all these dots. And when you're hearing all these movements consistently, I want to know whether the Democratic Labour Party is proposing a system where the people can elect judges on the basis of popular demand. Right? Right. I under strict instructions not to deal with you. Strict instructions not to deal with you. Not today. Not today. Mr. President, we also heard that a number of things that to me that actually really don't make sense, right? And I want to say to this chamber, the government is proceeding on a basis that, as the earlier speaker before me said, and the boy spoke, does not interfere or infringe with any rights. This gives every single citizen who casts a vote in election for a member of parliament to have access to that member of parliament to contribute to the debates in the Parliament of Barbados in a way that they have, by way of a social contract, elected that person and expect and demand of them the representation, not to sit down in a chair and not be able to participate in the discussions of the day. Mr. President, no one can fault the requirement of the ministers to visit either houses, to participate and lead in the debate, to answer questions and to engage with members of other houses. Only last week, Mr. President, I gave a presentation for the Caribbean Sociological Association on the emergence of security threats and how they impact on fundamental rights within the context of the Caribbean. The world has fundamentally changed. We have, within our region, the escalation of the buildup and the buildup of military from the United States of America. We have border clashes between Guyana and Venezuela, border clashes between Guyana and Suriname. We have a lot of cybersecurity issues. We have threats by artificial intelligence. But what is most concerning when we talk about rights, and why this is important within the constitutional context, we see more importantly the devaluation of the rule of international law. You see what happens in Gaza. And right in our doorsteps, state murder in international waters. These things have importance for us as small states. Because if the concept of international law that guides the bedrock of the United Nations system and all the international and multilateral institutions, the system of the international rule of law is no longer observed. If your absence or refusal to be a signatory to the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice or the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea could allow you to be a bully in the Caribbean Sea and terminate people without any court, any police, any charge, any ability to answer the charge level against you. We saw what happened in Gaza, and it means, therefore, that we are closer and closer to what Haile Selassie and Bob Marley signed in his epitaph, that the rule of international morality would remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued. Our Parliament must address these things, and if by need of the necessary amendments to secure the democracy that we treasure and the rights of our people, we have to do the right thing. We have to put our citizens in a position where the elected members can speak, where ministers who hold ministerial responsibility, because it is becoming more and more complex. And when I hear things like we need to reduce the members of parliament, and we need to reduce the ministers of government, step into one of those shoes for a little bit and see how complex the notions of governments are. And we will come to the economics issues later on today and this week, because we are changing the guard in several ways and it makes people uncomfortable. But we can't sit down like the Democratic Party do for 10 years and make no decision on anything. Because their philosophy is that there has never been anything since 1966 that won't change in Barbados. And that is why they, at the last 2 terms of office, have failed the country and have been kicked out of office in the certain majorities. Without any benefit. They can't call one sectoral improvement that they've brought since 1966. or any major initiative have not learned or forgot anything since 1966. That is their mantra. But the country, and you hear this thing, we bringing it on the eve of Christmas. So what must the government do? Shut down? Make no decisions? Stop working? When it comes, we shouldn't be doing it in length. We shouldn't be doing it at crop over. We shouldn't be doing that. So what is the government supposed to do? Sit splendidly in isolation as a small developing state and do not make the critical decisions that are important for the benefit of the country and the country's systems of governance. They talk about constitutional reform and constitutional transformation and parliamentary reform. Never delivered. They talk about the republic. That commitment was given on the 50th anniversary of our independence, not delivered. All the other reforms have to happen. Educational reform has to happen in a country like Barbados, because the world does not owe us a living. Mr. President, I firmly believe, and I take the advantage of having the students of my alma mater here to close on these words. The words of the immortal, this is a proper closing, not repetition. The words of the Trinidadian Nobel laureate V.S. Naipaul in his book, A Bend in the River, in which he sets out the journey of Celine with these words: the world is what it is, and men who are nothing, and who allow themselves to be nothing, have no place in it. For the benefit of my daughters, one of whom is returning this afternoon after a period of study overseas, I will say it in the right way. The world is what it is, and women and men who are nothing, and who allow themselves to be nothing, have no place in it. The country, Mr. President, will make a choice very soon. It will determine whether or not, and when I say very soon, I'm speaking in the next year and a half, but I'm being serious about it. It will make a choice as to whether or not we want to go back to a state of nothingness, where the economy doesn't grow, where problems are not addressed, where sewage flows in the streets, where roads are not fixed, where there are no buses, where taxes are raised and high. All these things will happen. But all of a sudden, when the transformation process is being set in train, adjustments are difficult, but adjustments are also necessary. And in the process of adjusting, you can have people who are being uncomfortable because you're accustomed to certain systems. But a lot of the systems which undergird our performance as a society cannot work in a digital information age. But we can't deny ourselves as a parliament to put ourselves in a position where the ministers who have the expertise in a particular area are able to guide and contribute to the debates. We can't put ourselves in a situation, Mr. President, where demographic change will mean that every election cycle the constitutions change. But that will cause chaos in Barbados, because we know our political boundaries, Mr. President, by way of the parish boundaries. That has been the norm in Barbados. We are settled there. But you imagine if we did not adjust the percentages to be more reflective of these demographic trends that we have, where a small change automatically requires the change of boundaries that occurred to you, Mr. President, when you were a member of Parliament, where you lost a significant segment of your voting population that supported you to another constituency that was shoved into a different parish. Your entire eastern corner, eastern corner of Christchurch East went into a place called St. Philip West, where there's no real affinity or relationship with the Philippine culture. But they're in a constitution because that boundary change was necessitated by the clear adherence to the percentages that were there. We broadened that framework to allow for the EBC to make the necessary changes where there is a greater shift in the population that merits a change and not merely adhering to a smaller number. But these are not things that need wholesale constitutional reform to do. They They're really not. And to frame it in the context of we're trying to manipulate boundaries and all these kind of things, this is not a country that has ever respected gerrymandering or any attempts at it. We can go through the history. When they took Orange Hill off of St. James and put it in St. Andrew, them did that so that they could weaken crime. But it brought in Elby Brathwaite, who had run for 4 or 5 election cycles in St. Andrew and couldn't win. We've seen examples of that. And we have not had a lot of gerrymandering in Barbados. No, the people of our country will not accept that from a government. These are not changes intended to affect any particular boundary, to give any particular advantage. And as I wrap up, Mr. President, I want to assure the country that the Labour Party will continue to be steadfast in its resolve to make sure that the interests of this country and its people are protected. We are not going to sit down idly by. We will make decisions, some of them will be unpopular, but we can make the right decisions from our perspective. Because we see a problem, we can fix it and face it. We see an opportunity, we can take advantage of it. We want to let our people rise. And as I said recently, Sir, Barbados must win. No one wants to see Barbados fail. We will win. I'm obliged to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Gregory Nichols. Senator Tate.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a little risky. It's not usually my standard to speak without being fully prepared, but I just have a few questions that I would like to have addressed. Sorry, y'all. Sorry. So start over. Mr. President, I'm joining this debate because as usual I have questions. I don't have anything to highlight other than queries. We are here today to deal with some constitutional amendments. So my first concern, Mr. President, is I think Senator Nichols says the government will make decisions and they're not waiting and they're not taking 10 years to make decisions and all of that political rhetoric because it's that season. My query is, though, the Constitution is, let me make the statement, the Constitution is our law. It is who we are supposed to be. It is supposed to be the position, our law. And what I am concerned about is why we keep going at it piece, like it's a bill, as opposed to the Constitution. We should be approaching the Constitution carefully. We should be approaching it slowly. I know that's a term that Senator Monroe-Knight does not like us to use. She always says we don't go slow. But we should be clear when we are going towards the Constitution. So my first query is, we had a Constitutional Reform Commission that dealt with constitutional amendment, but we haven't seen it here yet. And so are these proposed amendments a part of that commission's remit? Is it that the commission, where's the report? Because amendment, to my mind, would be, I was expecting if we're going to be tackling a constitution that has been around for some time, that we're going to do it holistically. We're going to do it after public discourse, public debate. Piecemeal sounds or feels like a rushed thing, an unsure thing. And I'm looking at these two amendments and I'm looking for the earth-shattering urgency of either one. Now, one can argue, depending on how you look at it, that the one that's dealing with the speaker may be earth-shattering and urgent depending on when the bell is rung. But by itself, it's not urgent. And the one that allows the, in my opinion, let me add that, in my opinion, it's not urgent. Not to the point where we're doing a constitutional amendment on the 15th of December 2025 before Christmas without discussion, without bringing in the public, without the commission's input. It's not before us. The Parliamentary Reform Commission has come before us, but from my recollection, the Constitutional Reform Commission, notwithstanding we have members of it sitting with us, is not here. So my question is, why? Why are we messing, my word, with the Constitution, with two not very important, to my mind, amendments for something as important as our Constitution? Now, whether it's a republic constitution, as referred to by Senator Worrell, or if it's a constitution, it is the ultimate law of Barbados. It is not something to be trifled with. So that is my first question. Why? Why these two? What about more important things that we could be dealing with the Constitution? So that's my first question. Secondly, if we're coming with an amendment, where is the detail? We have no information. The information that comes with this proposed amendment, let's deal with the Speaker, has no procedural detail. We're making amendments that if we're not careful, we're going to have to amend our amendments. And we know this government is good at that. But the problem is, when you do it with a bill, that's one thing. But to have to be messing with the Constitution to fix something, that is a different thing altogether. You're not supposed to come to the Constitution unless and until you're sure. My question as it relates to the Speaker, though, this makes provision, sir, if I'm looking at clause 45A2, and I quote, sir, when the House of Assembly first meets after any dissolution of Parliament and before it proceeds to the dispatch of any business, it shall elect a person who is not a member of the House of Assembly or the Senate to be Speaker. And whenever the office of Speaker becomes vacant for any reason other than a dissolution of Parliament, the House shall, as soon as practicable, elect another such person to that office. Okay, we have that. But Mr. President, the person shall not be a member of the House of Assembly or the Senate. But is this person, I believe it was the leader of government business spoke of an independent speaker. So what does that really mean? Because it's not defined here from what I can see from my quick glance. Sir, I just became aware of the legislation this morning, having only been sworn in on Friday. So, sir, does independent mean, well, no, let me ask the question differently. How soon before a person is not a member of the House of Assembly or the Senate can a person be qualified to be the Speaker, this independent Speaker, sir? I recall that for the purposes of the office of the President, the person must neither be of either house, but it has to be for a period of 12 months, if I'm correct, subject to correction. There's no such qualification for the Speaker. So having set a precedent and a qualification for the President, I would figure that the Speaker's position is just as important. No, that's probably not, should have probably not been said. The President is the head of state. It is important. The Speaker is an important person. The Speaker manages the House of Assembly. And if we're talking about independent Speaker and we're being transparent, should we not have a qualifying time period within which a Speaker cannot be a member of the House of Assembly or not a member of the Senate, bearing in mind that you set the precedent by giving the President-elect a 12-month period within which you cannot be in either House of Assembly or the Senate. If not, you don't qualify to be a president. Because that stops you from being elected to be president if you're in another house or in a house prior to within 12 months. So that's a question I have. There's no qualifying time for the prospective Speaker in the event that there is a feeling that the impending Speaker should come from a house. And so that person who would sit right up to dissolution as speaker, and then when there's dissolution is no longer speaker, and you have an election, and then in 3 weeks, can that person then come and be speaker, the independent speaker? How does it work? Why is it not here? It's a constitutional amendment. So by that alone, it demands and it dictates detail, clarity, transparency. I'm just asking, Mr. President, for clarity for me. Because we have it, I said it again, we have it for the president. I'm not seeing it for the speaker. I get confused when things are not clear. Sir, we have provision 2 for the definition of legislator to be added to the Constitution. I'm not seeing, somebody can help me with if a senator falls into that category, because everybody's quick to advise those of us who are interested that senators are not legislators, notwithstanding the fact that a bill can't happen unless it comes to the Senate to be passed. One would have thought that that anomaly would have been addressed by the legislation or the proposed amendment to this Constitution. I remain confused, and unless I'm not understanding what I'm reading, which is entirely possible because I'm not perfect, believe it or not, Senator Nichols. But, sir, one would have thought that that would have been addressed, because I think it is a grave anomaly. You cannot have us legislating and then telling us we're not legislators. And I believe that should have been, or might have been, addressed by one of the, maybe, I don't know if it was addressed in the Parliamentary Commission report, but I'm just asking because I'm seeing reference to legislator defined here, but it doesn't seem as if senators fall into that category, which to me is flawed. That's seriously flawed. And on that note, we've also been asked to look at legislation that ensures, as it should, that the speaker acquires all of the rights. The independent speaker acquires all of the rights that would have been attributed to him had he been a member. But he is a member, had he been an elected member. But I'm not seeing anything for the senators, sir. We have recommendations, but we have no protection. So if the recommendations are not accepted, we continue to be the recipients of $1,726.06, if that's what it is. But we are the ones who will go through the legislation. And we are the ones who will deal with the resolutions. And we are the ones that when the leader of government business brings 10 bills, no, she'd never bring 10, I don't think, maybe 6, maybe 4. We're the ones who are going to go through. So again, I say, like I've constantly been saying, one must take into consideration the work of the senators of Barbados. It doesn't really matter which area, opposition, government, independent. The senators of this Senate, and I would dare say from 2018 going forward, were not rubber stamp persons. They were not persons who did not debate. They were not persons who did not send things back to the House to be sorted. And therefore, you cannot continue. And here's the thing. You are dealing with amendments. So let's deal with important amendments. And I will continue to say that the remuneration of senators and the ability to include that into a pension scheme is important. Because not to do so is to totally belittle the work that is being done in the Senate, the Honorable the Senate of Barbados. I am confused. If you're going to amend, even though you shouldn't be, let's make holistic, let's make amendments that make sense. Okay. Finally, sir, I hear we're allowing the ministers to present. If you're in this house, you can present in the other house, in the other house, you can present here, and the AG can present everywhere. My only concern is this, sir. It sounds really, really, really good. But this is only going to be effective if what is asked and what is raised and what is suggested to be changed is actually done. Because by the time we get it here, it's already a done deal and it's usually just to be passed. So passing this legislation and amending the Constitution to make it work, and then nothing is done to really make it work and to make it effective is a waste of time. And you're, again, trifling with the ultimate law of the land. That concerns me, sir. I'm not trying to trivialize the ability for if it should come from this house because the Minister of Health is in this house and he should be able to present in the law. I get it. But it's only going to work if it's effective. It's only going to work if those who are making themselves available for the change are prepared to take it to the next level and effect the change. Instead of saying thank you, and then the bill is passed in the exact condition that it was received, with the errors and the ambiguity and everything else that goes with it. Or worse yet, it gets repealed in 3 months. Sir, so we have amendments. I'm not terribly sure why. Nothing is earth-shattering. And sir, I just would like it to be that if my questions could be answered, that would be useful. I don't expect them to, but it would be useful if they could be. We need to stop sending a message that our Constitution is no more than a bill. We have to be beyond that, sir. I'm obliged to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Tate. Her Honor, the Most Honorable Senator H. Elizabeth Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I should like to begin by recognizing the students of the St. Michael's School, where I had the honor to go. In those days, it was the St. Michael's Girls' School, but boys came after I left, long, long ago. I wouldn't even tell them what year I left school because they would be in such shock. I am very pleased to see them paying attention here, and very much hope that this would have been really a learning experience for them today. I know that they have their speech day in a matter of weeks, because I also give the Liz Thompson Award to the school. I alternate between public speaking and exceptional writing. And I think last year we did public speaking, so this year is writing. And perhaps, I don't know if anybody in here would be the recipient of the prize, but I trust that the fact that you are here means that you are people who do have an interest in public speaking and public affairs, and that you will continue to nurture that interest in a time when so many people are content to get snippets of news and preferably truckloads of gossip from social media rather than serious discussion about national and international affairs. I pause too, before I get into the substance of my remarks, to welcome back the Honorable Senator, the Honorable Monique Tate, who truly, had she left us, I would have missed the Goldilocks, the constant smile, and the lashes delivered with it, with the smile. So it is good to see you. I'm particularly pleased to welcome Dr. Kenneth Connell, whom I knew as a little lad, rambunctious, to use a good Bajan expression, the apple of his parents' eye. I knew his dad, I know his mom. In fact, I had many a pleasant afternoon with her, eating pudding and salsa, laughing and talking with Gwyneth Squires about matters of politics and culture. So I can only imagine how my girl is purring today. And I join with her in congratulating her on his achievements, and would that her dad, his dad, could have seen this. But I'm sure he is smiling too. I have to confess that It is one of my many minority opinions on the Parliamentary Reform Commission that brings us here today, and I equally, the Parliamentary Reform Commission, yes, and I equally confess that it is with a certain amount of, and I'm not sure if it's an equal part, flattery, honor, and surprise that we are in fact taking this one amendment as the first of what I hope will be the significant changes that have been recommended over the course of the report. I want to start because some questions have been asked about the meaning of an independent speaker, and to try to give you some context, even though some has been correctly put, as to why I felt it was important. And in that minority opinion, I was joined by Dr. Richard Ishmael, who was persuaded by my arguments. Senator Nichols made the point about the historical evolution of the post and the risk of the speaker losing his head, but equally the tradition of dragging the speaker to the speaker's seat evolved in consequence of the fact that the speaker was surrendering their right to speak on behalf of those whom elected them within the chamber for which they were elected. I always found it a most peculiar thing that you could have a tremendous amount to contribute to national discourse, that you would want to fight on behalf of your constituents, to articulate for their needs, to advocate for challenges within the socio-cultural and socio-economic boundaries of the constituency, but that you were prevented from so doing because you were sitting in the chair and must maintain silence. In fact, His Honor Speaker Rowett had the habit of giving a little smile if there was a debate going on the estimates, for instance, or the budget, and they were speaking about road repair or new buses or new bus routes. He would smile and say, I hope this is going to pass through, and he would identify an area in his constituency, and the minister who was speaking would immediately be put on the back foot because the speaker is appealing from the chair, albeit in a very charming and permissible way. Look, do something in my constituency, please. And I'm sure His Honor, the President, remembers those days. So I felt it important that that right should be retained by elected representatives, and that independent or speakers who were not an elected member should be brought to the chamber. In addition, that we have a system where there are 30 seats. You could have a tie. And it has been our experience in the past with a 14-16, a majority of 2, that there has been great difficulty in convening meetings, in having certain bodies meet, in getting somebody to sit in the chair, who is to go on holiday, who is to leave on government business, whether they can or cannot. It really became very, very difficult from a functional perspective. And I had in mind that that should never occur again, because you cannot anticipate how people will vote. And in setting the minority opinion, it was also my view that we should have a situation where there would always be an uneven number of seats in the House, so that it militated against, in 2 ways, you're having these potential conflicts of a speaker who is elected and can't speak for his constituents, a speaker who is elected and has to take the chair, and then you have difficulty with numbers in the chamber in matters that had to be voted on and so on. And that was in the forefront of my mind when I led that minority opinion. Dr. Ishmael, Richard Ishmael, joined with me. What is an independent speaker? An independent speaker in this context is one who is not elected and a sitting parliamentarian. It has no wider meaning than that. Because I imagine that persons may or may not have experience, or who come to the post for the first time may have to learn on the job, as indeed you do, or get training. So it is a person who is not elected and sitting in the chamber at the time of their election as speaker. It is not complicated. In fact, when you ask about what does independence mean in the context of our parliament and even in the Senate, I heard the honorable senator just now asking about this matter of independence and what is important or not to define independence. We have had in this chamber, and I certainly wish Dr. Crystal Drakes well as she journeys onward, we have had a senator move from an opposition at the beginning of an election and by the end of an election was being classified as independent. Does a tiger change their stripes? So this notion that you have to have some kind of ultra independence and that it has to be defined in particular ways, if not there can't be transparency, if not there can't be good functioning and so on, is really interesting, but not realistic in the context of Barbados and our political experiences, our recent political experiences, and the proximity of persons posing the question to persons who made this amazing transition from opposition to independence in a matter of days. And the reality is that in a small society, you have people of limited, you have a limited talent pool. There are not going to be lots of people out there with the experience or knowledge of parliamentary affairs who can immediately walk into the role of speaker. So let's not persuade ourselves that there's a large number of people out there and that there will be 40 that will apply or 40 that will be considered, and you can narrow it down, shortlist 12, and then go down, reduce further from that. It is not going to happen like that. In fact, we have had in this country somebody move from the lower house to being a judge. We've had somebody move from the lower house to being a chief justice. And there have not been complaints about lack of transparency, about the separation of powers and abuses of the separation of powers. And in each case, one of the two people, one came from the Democratic Labour Party, and one came from the Barbados Labour Party. Some people may not even have the memory of the first person who made that transition from the lower house to a judgeship. Well, that's a third one, because you had Moe, you had Smith on the Democratic Labour Party side. But no, today the Democratic Labour Party is raising questions about when you create independence, what does it mean, and what are the implications of this? These are political maneuverings that seek to guide the public away from the real substance and content of the changes that you're making and the consequence of those changes. My view is that if you look at the legislation, this legislation allows for the speaker to have a casting vote in the recommendation or the minority opinion which I gave. That was not part of it, simply because with the House numbers at 31 or 29, you would not have had the issue of having a speaker who would have to have a casting vote. And it is not too late to ask ourselves, what is the optimum size of our parliament? I have to confess that when I first ran in 1991, the nature of canvassing was very, very different to what it is today. People expected to see you in their constituency and at their door. And the reality was that you could get there because people did not have guard dogs, guard fences, high walls, etc. And families would often be at home or near home. By 2008, when I left Parliament, even in what we call lower income communities, you could not get to people's front doors. And everybody had a cell phone. And when friends were coming by, they would call and say, "I out here, open the door." Otherwise, you would be ringing or calling, and people would think it is Jehovah's Witnesses or some other, or nuisances of some sort, and nobody looks out. You are out there begging, "Hello, inside, Miss B." Nobody is paying you any attention at all, at all. So canvassing house to house really became virtually impossible, even though people still expected. But it also became further complicated by the fact that you had a much more mobile population, so that people were hardly home. When you went before, Granny would be home, and Granny would tell you, "Look at George in the back, let me call you, hold on." And Granny would go and call George, and the children would be coming and looking and peeping, and the teenagers would be hanging out and so on. That was over, apart from the fact that you couldn't get there. When you asked Granny then for George, Granny would say, "George? Oh, George had cricket. Well, you know, George was drinking last night, so you will see him out here. No, he sleep by." And she would give you a name, and you would get all kinds of stories, but these are our social realities. So that before, you could have these large constituencies, or you could have smaller constituencies, because you needed to make contact with everybody. Now, people expect that you will send them messages via some social media platform. People expect that you are going to WhatsApp them. People expect that they will come out to mass canvassing events. People expect that they will be part of the massive public meetings, which have become huge social events. People are no longer no, of course we are talking about VLP public meetings, because while the honourable senator was talking just now about Senator Nichols not getting the opportunity to even speak until recently, I could not help but think that he does not even get an opportunity to talk to the Whistling Frogs in St. John's. But is spending time talking about other people not speaking and not getting opportunities to speak. But such is the opportunity when you get up, you say what you can or what you wish at the time. So that canvassing, and everybody, of course, has a constituency office. So there are now different ways of making contact with constituents or prospective constituents. And I think we have to ask ourselves the question, do we want to have smaller constituencies? In which case, that in theory allows for more personal contact, but realistically, it doesn't happen. Or should we have bigger constituencies, because the type of canvassing and the type of interaction with members of parliament has changed and continues to change, not because our parliamentarians are not necessarily as attentive, but because the social practices and the social norms and the way communities behave, line, have recreation, and live have all changed significantly over the course of a decade and a half. So that raises the question of what is the optimum size of a constituency? Would we want to shrink constituencies in order, when I say shrink, collapse constituencies and make them larger? Because there are some constituencies, and it is interesting, the demographics in the country. You have St. James South, nearly 11,000 people, running between Claremont, Holders Hill, Paradise Heights, and going northward toward Redmond Village. You have St. Philip North and South. Well, I don't know the boundaries as well. Again, close to 11,000 people. But you have, I don't think you can find 5,000 people in the city. There are other St. Michael constituencies that are collapsing in terms of size because people are moving. St. Thomas used to be a large rural constituency with stable families and populations where when you went down the street, and I've had the opportunity to canvass in St. Thomas, you go down a certain road, they will tell you, oh, look, up home or down home or mine there or so-and-so, gone, because everybody on the avenue is related. Everybody in the gap is related. No more. St. Thomas is now a lot of middle-class people, no particular roots to the community or the constituency. They've come from other places. It's very, very urban, very middle-class. It is not the kind of constituency that it used to be in the past. And those who are going to attempt to represent it should take note that voting patterns in the constituency were not what they used to be. A word to the wise is enough. So because of these demographic dynamics, or dynamic demographics, depending on how you put it, the question of how we are going to organize constituencies in the future does, in my view, arise. In addition, the question of, we had really a very interesting political event over the course of last week when two senators who are independent chose to offer their resignation to the president because the president was not the president who appointed them. Now, when we are talking about shifts in our constitution and shifts within our parliamentary process, I think that this is another question at which the government may in time want to look. It certainly was a matter that I intended to deal with as a member of the PRC, and it just slipped me and I didn't realize it till after the report was written and it was too late. Our constitution as currently structured, once you are appointed as an independent senator, there really is no removal mechanism. And the idea behind it is that the independent senators really should be allowed to have some degree of autonomy and independence. And in theory, they are representative of some particular national interest or thought which some group or the president, whomever that person is, may want to have represented in our parliament. Parliament, they're used in the widest possible context. Now, if that is true, then, in my view, the president should be able, whomever that person is, to move a senator at any time. But it may not be because of personal reasons in the way that people see it, or it may not be because they are the appointing president. It can come from the fact, and this is why I'm saying we should consider a situation where an independent senator can be moved. Let us assume that President X, and I am deliberately not using a name, let us assume that President X appointed a medical doctor who was a COVID specialist to the Senate in a situation of a national crisis and epidemic. Let us then assume that that national crisis comes to an end. It is no longer a difficulty. You don't have the degree of death and disability or risk and so on. And so the person serving in the Senate, the primary reason for their appointment really has ended. But let us assume then that there is a series of cyber attacks on the country. The president may decide, look, COVID is no longer a problem, but these cyber attacks are a problem. I would like to change my senator. But the legislation, the Constitution as currently structured, does not allow even the appointing president that flexibility. And therefore, it is something that we should consider and at which we could look in the future, because it does have implications for, let us assume that the person was appointed by President X on the advice of the Manufacturing Association. But let us then assume that the person left the Manufacturing Association and is no longer a member. How can they represent the Manufacturing Association's interests in the Senate if they are not even a member of the Manufacturing Association anymore? So these are things that I see and they're looked at with keen interest, but I really believe that this is something to which we need to give thought, because while you want to retain independence, and I understand the reason for that, there also has to be some degree of flexibility which represents actual changes, both in terms of the appointing officer, in terms of national conditions or national interests, which you may want to hear reflected in the Senate at a particular time, or the interests of a particular body, institution, or organization whose voice you want to have, but who the named representative, for whatever reason, no longer truly speaks on behalf of. There are other minority opinions that I have made, and I would hope that over the course of time, we can see more of them here. I am particularly keen, and I think it is important for us to look at some of the mechanisms in the report that really seek to expand the voice of the average citizen and the true advocacy allowed and representation allowed within the context of our democracy. One of the recommendations was that average citizens should be able to lay questions and issues for consideration by the House of Assembly, and that the House of Assembly, once it is certified by the Speaker, should be able to debate issues that citizens feel are of importance to them. Not legislation brought by the government, but things that citizens think impact their daily lives. It is a way of keeping government more accountable. It is a way of broadening the voice of the citizen. Equally, there was a recommendation that any member of Parliament could bring a matter to the House that affected something in their constituency, therefore challenging other ministers, challenging the government to deal with a local issue. Many a time, I know that parliamentarians have issues in their constituency that they are tired begging their cabinet colleagues to address quietly. But they would value the opportunity, because sometimes they would value the opportunity to make their advocacy public, because sometimes constituents truly do not recognize that you have been advocating for them within, to your cabinet colleague, to the minister, responsible, etc. And they feel that the fact that they have not heard you speak about it, and in fact your membership of the cabinet may act as a constraint on you speaking out about it in public. The fact that they haven't heard you speaking about it in public, they interpret that to mean that you really ain't care nothing about them and you have not been speaking about the issue on their behalf. So the opportunity to challenge ministers, the opportunity to bring issues as a parliamentary representative, even if you are in the cabinet, before the House, on that it is a matter of constituency or national importance, and have it debated, have it litigated in that court, the highest court in the land, is an important mechanism that we also wanted to give. I very much support the idea embedded now in the draft, in the bill, that ministers should be able to move freely between the houses. And I hope that that means we will be able to see the ministers also in the well of Parliament at the time of estimates, so that we can hear from the entire cabinet what the issues are and hear ministers present in that forum, because that is one of the more interesting additions to how we do our business in terms of estimates that the public enjoy and to which they pay close attention. So I hope that we can see that. Equally, now that we have the young people in here, another recommendation, we were very concerned about the fact that there was no youth voice in the parliament, and that you could vote at 18, but that you could not be elected. And our view remains that if in fact you can get enough people who want to vote for you, then that is something that should be considered. I will not repeat all of my minority opinions. There were many. And it wasn't that. Perhaps I should frame it the other way, rather than in the negative, frame it more positively. I was very mindful of the fact that I had different views from the majority of the body as to how things should be done and as to changes that we needed to make. And I felt that we needed to make changes that allowed for greater empowerment of the citizens, of individuals, of parliamentarians. And having served, I felt that their terms and conditions, including those of senators, needed to be improved. So that I was mindful too that it was important to give government choice. And that is why I insisted that when the report was written, that every minority opinion should be recorded and the rationale for it, so that government could understand what was the thinking that led the majority to decision X and the thinking that led the minority to recommendation Z. I think that we were able to do that. And the truth is that I recognize that some of the things that I suggested or recommended, or the points on which I differed, may attract the attention of various groups in the society. Like I said, I was quite pleased to see that this attracted the government's attention. But I don't expect that they will agree with me on every occasion. I know that I will get a lot of opposition on the point of quota systems for women, which I strongly believe in. Or, to say grammatically correctly, in which I strongly believe. Yes, indeed. I will not mislead them. In which I strongly believe, not strongly believer. Bad grammar, bad. So I don't expect, but at least the government has the benefit of my thinking and the thinking of everybody else who made minority opinions. And the government has choice. That is the important thing, that the government has choice, and we have been transparent in conveying our rationale so that any member of the public can see and understand what we decided and by what means we got there. This notion that judges should be elected as in the United States, I do not at all agree with. You can see how partisan judges in the United States are, and you can almost, depending on who the government is and who has been appointed, predict the outcome of decisions and how rights shift according to the political perspective that is the dominant perspective at the time. So I am not going to support. We have not, this thing of electing judges. I can't say that we have found anything wrong with our system so far. There are some judges who have been excellent ones, and there are some who have not been as good, and that is the nature of any profession. But by and large, I think that our judicial system is one that is respected, and long may it so remain. The idea of a constitution or a parliament cannot be fixed. They must reflect social-cultural changes. They must reflect the ambitions and aspirations of a people. They must change as our society changes. They must reflect and mirror what is the best in the quintessential Barbadian. And they must show us what it is we can be if only we made just a little bit more effort. I truly believe that when both the CRC and the PRC sat, that those were the driving considerations. That how is it that a constitution and a parliament which have served us well to date can now be so changed that it continues not to discard history, but so changed that it reflects a new direction for the nation and enlarges the democracy for all our people. And I hope that those who take the time to read, I can only speak specifically of the report in which I was involved, that it was a tremendous honor for me to be so. And I hope that in time, people will come to see that we really did give it our best and that the recommendations we have made have tremendous value. Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Thompson. Senator the Honourable Christopher Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have committed to being brief. Mr. President, I too, like Senator Thompson, wish to say a few words on the resignations of senators. I believe that every individual has a right to determine their direction. And I say it, I've seen some flack, I heard some flack in various places regarding the resignations of 2 senators and the choice of 1 senator to stay resigned. I believe it's the individual's right to do follow whichever pathway she wishes to take. Mr. President, I could not help but note that this minority opinion in the Parliamentary Review Commission report has become a point for debate. And I do support the bill. But Mr. President, I observe that there's always a deputy speaker, but the deputy speaker will have to come from a member of the House, who an elected member will be the deputy speaker. And one is not able to predict which morning the speaker will fall ill or be detained at home by his or her wife or spouse. And it will mean, sir, that it would mean, sir, that we'll be back to square one where an elected member of parliament will be acting as speaker and one does not know for how long, whether for the day, for the moment, or for a week or 10 weeks. So I do not really know what problem we are really solving from that point of view. I leave that, sir, in that position. Sir, I'm still confused by the definition of a legislator. And I think that maybe I should have said something about it when I had the opportunity to, but I didn't. I hope that Senator Tate's queries will bring some clarity from someone. Now, Senator Maldu mentioned the voting population and gave an average, I think, of 8,000 persons in a population. Sir, I happen to have, when I came into this chamber on the first occasion, I was given a copy of the standing orders, and it was dated, amended 2003. And when I read the standing orders and I read the Constitution, the number 24 appeared somewhere, and I was trying to find whether at the time of the writing, if there were 24 members of Parliament rather than 30. So people conflate and mix up members of Parliament with the size of cabinet. And the two things are not connected in that sense. There will be members of the cabinet who will come from the Senate, and we know that based on what normally happens, the Senate is where you, as we say in medicine, cut your teeth, and then you move on. Congratulations, Senator Nichols. And sir, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Baynard. Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well done, Senator Maynard. I rise, obviously, to wrap up the debate and to attempt to respond to some of the queries that have been raised. And I start first and foremost with Senator Worrell. There are things that have been answered already far more adequately and comprehensively than I would be able in a position to, certainly by the members of the respective commissions. In the initial case, it would have been the member of the Constitutional Reform Commission, Senator Gregory Nichols, and more substantively to this point, because the amendment before this chamber, constitutionally that is drawn not from the Constitutional Reform Commission's report, but from the Parliamentary Reform Commission's report, which has been on the order paper, I believe, for the Senate for some time, and was debated a few weeks ago. And before then, it has been publicly available on the Parliament's websites, available to all, but more importantly, to members of this chamber for sure. So it is not something of which anyone recently had sight. And it has been very well publicized for a very long time. So I just wanted to respond to that up front. So the amendment is the Parliamentary Reform Commission's minority opinion, specifically as it relates to the independent speaker and some of the other things that are drawn from the functioning of the Parliament. That it is a constitutional amendment, and that is where it is rested, is a fact, but it is drawn from a reform of how we function in this Parliament. Now, Senator Thompson has quite adequately addressed the question of what is constituted by independent. And if we were comfortable as independent senators, surely sitting with a person who a minute ago was an opposition senator and they're an independent senator the day after, certainly we know that independence can apply. And I'm sure we've seen other instances, Mr. President, where because in Barbados, there's 1 degree of separation half of the time because the communities are so small. You know this body, you know that body. I knew Senator Connell because I worked in the University of the West Indies. Now we have Senator Thompson speaking about knowing Senator Connell's mother. And you know people who were campaign managers for one party today, but independent the next day. That is the nature of 1 degree of separation, Mr. President. So let us not be theoretical about what this means, because we live it in this very chamber, Mr. President. And so we want to be clear that when we assume these roles, we have seen people function in a way that allows them to say, I am independent, and to say so repeatedly, Mr. President. And we expect that as it relates to a speaker of the other place, that the same would apply. Now, I want to speak specifically about I believe Senator Nichols spoke about the differences between the UK system and our system and the parts of the the Westminster system that were retained. But I want to specifically make a reference to the correlation between the upper chamber and the lower chamber and why we would not make the changes in the upper chamber as we have done in the second and in the other place. Mr. President, Canada is a very different jurisdiction. Canada's Senate is not appointed in the same way that the Senate in Barbados is. There's no equivalence between the two. In Canada, There is an independent advisory board for Senate appointments. It vets potential senators. Recommendations are made representing specific regions, much like Senator Thompson spoke about in terms of the report of the Parliamentary Commission and the recommendations for specific interest groups to be appointed on the basis of that. But they go even further. They have the recommendations drawn from regions. They have the recommendations drawn from sectors. They go on to be appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister to the Governor General. But guess what happens, Mr. President? They serve until mandatory retirement at 75. Mr. President. So there's no equivalence between, we have to be careful sometimes when we pull things out of a hat to ensure that we are not misleading the public and that we are comparing apples with apples. And I certainly wanted to take that time today because we have the students with us. They have been very diligent and very faithful in sitting here throughout this lengthy debate. And I want to make sure that we allow them to go away with not just the substance of parliamentary reform, but the basis of research and analysis that compares apples with apples and oranges with oranges. And so, Mr. President, the appointment of a Senate is very different, as will be the case with the appointment of a president, relative to, but distinct from, the appointment of a speaker in the other place. So, Mr. President, I want also to associate myself with the comments that have been made by Senator Nichols and Senator Thompson on the size of constituencies. Mr. President, let me talk straight. In this Senate, we don't have constituencies. We don't have to walk the road and canvass in the way that Senator Thompson just spoke about. And it is fine for us to sit where we sit and project what we see and what we know on those that do what they do. And so, Mr. President, there is no 7,000 average constituency across the board, far from it. And I want to thank Senator Thompson for breaking down that we have constituencies that are 11,000 people. But even though the city, for example, may be a smaller constituency, the city, I'm 100% certain, is different in its demographic makeup than, say, St. Thomas. With a rural orientation, the needs in the city may be greater because you have higher levels of urban development that are going to be necessary as opposed to in a rural constituency. Are we creating equivalence? I don't think so, Mr. President. And so the weight of responsibility is going to be very different, necessitating the changes in the percentages as agreed by Senator Worrell, also because we're making that shift to allow for the avoidance of general gerrymandering, as Senator Nichols quite aptly pointed out. Now, Senator Tate spoke about the changes as it relates to senators and the role of legislators, the definitions of legislators, fair points, and on the question of pensions, Mr. President, no. I can say that I certainly take the point well on board. I am a senator. I have been a senator since 2018. I have been a cabinet minister since 2020, and I am told that far from being included in the Senate, pensions, even as a cabinet minister, I am not entitled to a pension after giving up my own career, giving up my time serving in the private sector, and that would apply equally to those other cabinet ministers who sit to my right. So that is a reality, Mr. President. So when people talk about we're just here for ourselves, sometimes again, as I said in the PRC report, we chuckle because people genuinely do not understand the sacrifices that are made in service to this country. But I leave that there for now, Mr. President, and I'm hopeful that at some point in due course that we will account for the time that professionals have put into serving country and their most productive years being given up in that service to our nation. Now, Mr. President, I want also to speak about the evolution of the voting public. I think Senator Thompson has been quite detailed on that. And so with the questions that have been raised, I think quite frankly, as I started out by saying, Senators Thompson and Nichols were very comprehensive, and we had organized to make sure that those were the two voices that spoke on the government side today because of, one, the minority opinion for the PRC that is being debated here today, and the leadership that Senator Nichols has brought to this chamber, especially as it relates to the Constitutional Reform Commission. So, Mr. President, these are the amendments that have been brought to the Honorable Chamber, and I beg to move that this bill not be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honorable the Senate resolve itself to committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it.
The Honorable the Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Madam Deputy, I beg to move that clause 1 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 1 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Madam Deputy President, I beg to move that clause 2 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 2 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 3 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 3 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 4 do now stand part.
The question is that clause 4 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. All against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill not be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Constitution Amendment Act 2025.
Mr. President, because this bill is being passed under Section 49 of the Constitution, and it requires a 2/3 majority, we need to take a vote at this time.
Please proceed.
Yes. Senator Cummins.
Yes.
Senator, the most honorable Mr. Jerome Walker, who is online, Mr. President.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, Senator Reid. Senator Reid.
Yes.
Senator Dr. Chantal Monroe Knight.
Yes.
Senator King,
Yes.
Senator Paris,
Yes.
Senator Andre Boyce,
Yes.
Senator Nichols,
Aye.
Senator Reverend Morris,
Yes.
Senator Trim,
Yes.
Her Honor, Senator the Most Honorable Elizabeth Thompson,
Yes.
Senator Nurse,
Aye.
Senator Maynard,
Aye.
Senator Tate,
Abstain.
Senator Kevin Boyce,
Aye.
Senator Reverend Canon Dr. John Rogers, Senator Malalu,
Aye.
Senator Dr. Kenneth Connell,
Yes.
Senator Worrell,
No.
Senator Walters,
No.
Mr. President, the results of the vote, 16 honorable senators voted in favor, 2 voted against, there was 1 abstention, and 1 absent. Therefore satisfying the 2/3 threshold in the Constitution.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Therefore, declare the Constitutional Amendment Act 2025 passed and so cited.
Sure.
No debate on this one.
Mr. President, order number 10, in the name of the Honorable Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Parliament Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2025.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, I beg to move this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will all honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The next, the ayes have it. This bill is read a second time.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further deliberation on this bill.
The Honorable the Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
Question is that clause 1 stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Madam Chair, I also beg to move that clause 2 do not stand part.
The question is that clause 2 do now stand part. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye?
Aye.
Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it. The schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
Question is that the schedule be now the schedule to the bill. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do not report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in the committee phase.
The question is that I do now report His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. We think the ayes have it. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Parliament Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2025.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the retiring. Yes. That be cited as the Parliament Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2020-25. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. The things the ayes have it, this bill is now passed and so cited. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this sitting of the Senate do now is suspended now for lunch and to reconvene at 5:15 p.m.
The question is that this sitting be suspended until 5 p.m. today. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Those against please say no. Between the ayes have it, this sitting is suspended until 5 p.m. today.